All right, so I did want to make another video about comparing Republicans and Democrats to each other, as far as the parties in power go. I mean, not necessarily the voters. Um, you know, I and I want to reiterate how much I despise the notion that both parties are the same, that they're both as useless, and I can't, I just can't stand that narrative. I even push back on the narrative that the lesser of two evils. I think they deserve more credit than just being the lesser of two evils. Um, I just feel like there's more room for nuance when it comes to that kind of thing. So the party can be in between being a good party versus being the lesser of two evils. Like there's something in the middle there that I think is fair to describe Democrats as. And obviously that still means that the Democratic Party is flawed. Without a doubt, it's flawed. I mean, there's no getting around that. I mean, I'm a progressive, and I find them, of course, frustrating. Um, I just think that they deserve more credit for the policies that they do pass. So with Bernie, of course, it was his goal was radical change. He wanted to revamp the capitalist system and not eliminate it, by the way, like some people like to claim he wanted to do. Um, he just wanted to make it more fair for the poor and middle class. And in order to do that, you have to make some serious dramatic changes. Um, the capitalist system we have is so toxic now. Not that I need to tell anyone that, obviously it's true. Um, I mean, the wealth disparity is so massive that it needs to be addressed. And Democrats aren't very doing that as far as making radical changes. But what they are doing is incremental change. And I don't think incremental change has to be bad. I don't think it needs to be an all or nothing thinking like, um, why even bother if you're not going to make radical change? Incremental change is useless. But I mean, it really isn't, right? And I don't necessarily. I think that we don't have to hate Democrats just because their changes are incremental versus being radical and sort of revamping things. So yeah, and I wanted to focus on economics too because economics is just not something that's talked about these days. There's too much emphasis on social issues, and it's not that those issues aren't important. It's just that seems to be all the focus. Is this culture war bullshit. Um, so I wanted to highlight specific policies that I think um, are worth acknowledging, both from Obama and Biden. And again, these laws that they've passed have been substantial. They're incremental changes, but they're still substantial, and they still mean something. They both passed policies that have significantly improved poverty in a short term or a long term basis, depending on what it is. And one of those policies of Obama that I think people have forgotten about was his 2009 stimulus package. So when that was going on, when they passed that law, we were in a free fall recession. So it started 3 or 4 months before Obama became president. It was the tail end of Bush's administration that there was this massive recession, the worst since the Great Depression. We were losing hundreds and thousands of jobs per month. Like that's how bad it was. It was a terrifying thing that this economy was sort of in this free fall. So Obama, he passed his stimulus act, and that is something that's been credited by independent economists as being something that, for the most part, single-handedly ended that terrifying recession. Once that law was passed and it was in effect for a couple months, the recession started getting better, and then it got to the point where the recession ended and we were back to getting job growth per month. And in fact, we've had job growth ever since then. We've had job growth every month since June or July of 2009. It's the longest stretch of job growth in American history. And that's at least somewhat because of Obama's Stimulus Act. So what Obama's Stimulus Act did is that it basically addressed consumer demand side economics. So, our economy is 70% demand. So if you want to spur growth, you have to address that. But the other thing that the law did at the same time was it gave relief to people who lost their jobs to the recession. So a provision that was in that was extending unemployment benefits for people who lost their jobs. It was something that made that less temporary and more address the actual issues that were going on, the climate that was going on at that time. So and the thing is, when you give people unemployment benefits, you're giving them money that they wouldn't spend otherwise. So with that recession, there was inevitably a drop in demand, consumer demand, consumer spending, and so this was addressed by the unemployment insurance. So it created jobs. So it created jobs because if people have money to spend that they didn't have before, that helps that helps the businesses get back to where they were. So if you lose your job and you're desperate for money, most people are going to spend it wisely. So they're going to spend it on things like clothing, food, shelter. So all those would be things that people in those positions were doing, and that's what it was. So when people lost their jobs, they were spending money on basic necessities, and those basic necessities in turn created more jobs because it created more demand, and that's the whole point of capitalism, and that's something that's what it did. And I also want to address the Affordable Care Act too. This was something that it obviously it's Affordable Care Act it didn't go nearly far enough as it should. It certainly didn't save our healthcare system, which is still shitty. But again, I want to focus on that nuance of it still made things better, and it's worth acknowledging that. So even though it was very still, the Affordable Care Act was still, fueling the corporate health insurance companies, it was still something that gave people health care when they didn't have it before. So millions of people, because of those subsidies, now had health insurance. And yeah, obviously those insurance plans benefit the corporations, and maybe that aspect of it is bad, I guess, I don't know, but it was still something that provided relief to people who didn't have any health insurance. And another major provision of Affordable Care Act is that it created a law for pre-existing conditions to be covered, and I think that's huge. I think that kind of gets lost in the narrative of the Affordable Care Act, because that was a big deal. You could have cancer and then you could get health insurance. And this, prior to the Affordable Care Act, you wouldn't be. It would be denied because you already had cancer. But Affordable Care Act reversed that. So if you had cancer and then you got health insurance, you could get coverage for the cancer. And that's huge. It made a huge difference in the well-being of people on our healthcare system. And again, this isn't enough. I believe that we do need a socialized system that makes healthcare more affordable for the poor and the middle class. Obviously, the Affordable Care Act didn't put much of a dent in that. Healthcare was expensive before and after Affordable Care Act, but still, millions of people having insurance plan was a pretty big deal. And in fact, one of Biden's laws that Biden passed, I think it was the Inflation Reduction Act, said he helped expand eligibility for millions more people to get health insurance plans. So Biden improved the system. And and it's worth noting that the healthcare system still sucks, but it still got improved. Obviously the Affordable Care Act benefited the corporations a lot, but it also benefited the people that were insured. So, take that for what you will, I guess. It's obviously it's not ideal for progressives, but it was something, and I think Obama deserves credit for that. And I also want to make the point that, on average, economics is better under Democrats than Republicans. So, this inflation issue aside, which is it's actually gotten better in the last few months, but in general, historically, economics metrics are better under Democrats. So we have more job growth, and wages go up. The stock market's better. All those things happen better under Democrats than Republicans. And obviously you can't attribute the party or the president all the way to economic success. Obviously there's other variables at play. But it is still worth mentioning that under Biden, there have been 13 million jobs created. Now, is Biden solely responsible for that? No, obviously. There's a lot of variables as to why we've had so many jobs created under Biden. And a lot of that had to do with the economy reopening after the pandemic. But yeah, sorry, I lost my train of thought. But yeah, anyway, I wanted to move on to, in general, I wanted to more discuss about the jobs, the economic metrics that are better under Democrats. So like I said, it's 13 million jobs were created. And there's a lot of variables that go into that. But it is still worth mentioning that there still has to be a connection between the political party and the economy to some extent. You can't say that it has nothing to do with it. I think people seem to assume that economics are better under Republicans because that idea sounds like it makes sense on paper. They're obviously do more for the wealthy. But the problem with Republican economic policies, the only thing that Republicans pass in terms of economics is huge tax cuts and maybe deregulation. But mostly they pass massive tax cuts that really harm the deficit. And the problem with corporations and wealthy people getting huge tax cuts is, I mean, the idea is that, oh, well, they'll take that money and they'll invest it in labor. They'll boost wages for their employees, and they'll hire more people. But because the wealthy and corporations are already so powerful and wealthy, there's no incentive for them to invest that money into things like labor. It's just easier for them to keep it. Like why bother investing in labor and hope it pays off in terms of profit? You might as well just keep the money you're getting, because you're getting so much money. It's just a no-brainer for them. They're not gonna. It's just one of those things that sounds good on paper, like, oh, they'll create more jobs and they'll boost income, and it sounds like it makes sense, but they just don't do that because they're already so wealthy and powerful. So when they get these new tax cuts, it's just like, well, we'll just keep the money and then we'll wait for the next one. So that's the major flaw of supply side economics, which is Republican economics. And Democrats focus more on demand side economics, and that's what effective policy looks like. So you need to boost consumer spending, because consumer spending is the driving force of the economy. If that's down, then the economy is going to suffer no matter what. And you can do that in a number of ways. I think a lot of economic policies under Democrats have improved the economy in a sort of indirect sort of way. So this Biden infrastructure law that he passed, the massive investment, which was near $1 trillion, which you could argue wasn't enough, but government spending is bad, I guess. That a law like that is going to benefit the poor and the middle class. It's going to invest more into the companies that provide infrastructure service. Those private construction companies. They're obviously getting a handout, but that doesn't mean that the handout doesn't benefit the middle class and poor. But and I don't know. I certainly Democrats are doing very little about income inequality, but they're also not doing nothing either. So that I think is important to realize. And I also wanted to focus on the policies that Democrats try to do, but they don't actually pass. And I think they deserve credit for trying. Maybe that's a debatable position. I don't know, but one thing Obama tried to do was raise the minimum wage to like $10.10 an hour, and obviously that wasn't enough, but it was something. It would have boosted consumer spending. It would have alleviated poverty a little bit. And unfortunately, that didn't get passed. But I guess I just think, shouldn't Democrats get, or any party, shouldn't they get credit for the things they try to pass? Another example is the child tax credit. This was something that actually passed, but it was a temporary measure so Democrats failed to extend it. So it expired. But that was still something that had a tangible effect on people in poverty. It helped alleviate poverty to a certain extent during the pandemic, and obviously the $1,200 stimulus checks helped as well. And of course, under Trump we had a similar, Trump and Republicans helped pass, stimulus for people. I forgot what the amount was. It wasn't $1,200, and they get credit for that, I guess. But otherwise, they're useless. Republicans are useless for the middle class and poor. Democrats are not useless. They just don't go far enough. And incremental change doesn't have to be a bad thing if it's better than nothing at all. So, yeah, I mean, I think that kind of sums it up. I don't want to get into too many explanations of policy. I don't want to make this video too long. I mean, I might make a follow-up video where I go into detail about Democrat policies that they passed, that like what the actual effect was. But I at least wanted to highlight them because they count for something.